Bitcoin that isn't moved for 10 years is being used by somebody. That doesn't mean necessarily that it's lost. It just means that people are hanging on to it and it's a store of value for them. My view, like on Bitcoin, is that it's the only asset that we've ever seen in the history of the world that is a fixed supply, that actually is a fixed supply. But in North America, I mean, we have supposedly somewhere in the range of 40% of households are going paycheck to paycheck right now, like with no savings at all. Landfills in Africa could basically power the Bitcoin network if you were able to actually tap into that waste gas. We see now there's a couple of operations in Africa that are actually starting to do that.
Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Today I'm here with a fantastic guest, Murray, which is science advisor for Satoshi Educate. How you doing, man?
Oh, pretty good. Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
For those of whom that don't know you, do you mind to give us an intro and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, that could be a long story, but I'm a Canadian from the west coast of Canada, and my background is actually in environmental economics and policy. So I spent part of my career, I started in salmon farming, so I had like hands-on, like raising salmon and selling them, and then eventually I went back to school and did an undergrad and a master's degree in agricultural economics, and then I did a PhD in basically economics of households. So looking at demand and sort of all sorts of things, applied microeconomics. And I worked for the Canadian government for 6 years with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And then I went out to academia. And once I went to academia, I was fairly mobile. So I spent time in the east coast of Canada and 6 years in England. And then I was at Atlanta, Georgia for a little while, then to Sweden. And then I quit working and decided to retire to a photography business actually in 2019. And then that got killed because of COVID. My tours weren't, couldn't do tours for a couple of years there. That's the very quick. From a Bitcoin perspective, I was one of these people that saw it really early. I used to hang out some of the extropian listservs and things like that back in the 1990s. So I wasn't too much on, on the sort of the hardcore programming or the stuff that was going on in some of the Bitcoin oriented lists. But it was sort of like as it got developed, I had heard about it and heard about it with like the Bitcoin faucet when that was out, which I think was 2010, maybe 2010 or 2011. But I just never picked up on it. Like I just, so it took me a while. I was one of these people that was 3 encounters before I actually got to actually buying anything.
Well, thank you for the intro. Fantastic. Yeah, we discussed about our travels and our experiences abroad, which is really
Yeah.
good. Always happy to talk to a fellow traveler, that's for sure. And you touch on energy, which is an interesting topic because whenever I speak to someone which is a no coiner or whatever, a normie as we say, well, Bitcoin is not energy efficient and it burns a lot of energy. What's your view on it? What's your take?
Well, I think that the first part of my view is that once you understand what Bitcoin is, you're much more prone to view the energy use as a positive. I mean, the energy use is what secures the chain, which makes Bitcoin Bitcoin. And there's just no getting around that. So when I talk to people about energy, that's one message right off the bat. And then the other message, of course, and like, I guess the part of you mentioned, but I didn't really talk about was Satoshi Action. So I've been working with Dennis Porter now for the past just 2 years and a little bit over 2 years right now. And for Satoshi Action, one of the important things for us is to have credible research that we can bring to policymakers. And for Satoshi Action, energy has been a huge part of that. Bitcoin mining, the organization's actually Dennis formed it to as a to support proof of work, and so both on the advocacy side and on the research side. So I'm with a separate NGO, or a separate nonprofit in the U.S. that is oriented towards research, and then a lot of the lobbying stuff that Satoshi Action does, that's all done through a U.S. oriented nonprofit. So the reason that we got interested in energy, and I'm not an energy economist by background, but I use quite a few of the same techniques, um, is because that the energy, there's all this potential to use excess energy that's produced and wasted in other places. So the world produces a lot of wasted energy, and there's a lot of resources that could be monetized to create energy that isn't that aren't used right now. And so that was part of the real focus why we first looked, when I first started working with Dennis, why we were so focused on energy to begin with.
A big battery, right? So Bitcoin is converting energy, or sometimes energy, like you said, which is wasted or never used in the first place, and is
Yeah.
making into something else. So if anything, I think it's helping the environment, because when people are saying, "Oh, it's wasting energy," I think they're missing the point. Is
Well,
banks
and
waste
I
of energy?
that well that's part of it too. It's like, so the energy for the security, and what is the energy being used for? Now, if you view Bitcoin as a total Ponzi and scam, then any amount of energy is going to be a waste. But if you once you look at Bitcoin and start to understand what it is and what it does and what the potential for it is, then that's exactly like you said. Is it a waste of energy compared to the banks? And if Bitcoin becomes a major part of the financial system in the world in the future, when you trade off, nobody's done it rigorously, but you got to think that all the energy that the banks of the world spend probably exceeds Bitcoin mining. You know, maybe not, but it would be an interesting thing to see. And so there's all these different services that Bitcoin provides society potentially, and how do you start to put how do you define that? When is energy a waste and when is it not a waste? And that's a very, it's a huge question that people will probably be grappling with for the next 20 years or so.
Exactly. And then if you look into gold, for example, which is, as far as I know,
uh,
today is one of the main reason why people want to store their wealth into it. Well, think about the damage, also the excavation, and in data you find what you're looking for. And I think
yeah.
if you are someone like you said who's a negative Nancy, whatever you want to label it, he or she will
Mm,
find only the flaws. You can be logic with it and say, okay, well, its user energy is because it stores energy. So, and it's portable, divisible, transportable. We all know these things, but it's
yeah.
fascinating to talk about energy. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's fascinating too, from the perspective that when you look at waste energy around the world, how much of Bitcoin's network could be powered potentially by waste energy. It's just amazing. So we did a paper, an academic paper on waste methane, like landfill gas. What are the economics of it? And that was done. We did that with a company called Nodal, and they have landfill facilities that they're running in Utah, Utah and New Mexico, and they partnered up with Marathon, I think, if I remember correctly. But when we were doing that, a part of the background for the paper that I was digging around in was, well, how much waste energy is there out there in the world? And when you start to think about waste energy, especially for biomass waste and for landfills, so landfills in Africa could basically power the Bitcoin network if you were able to actually tap into that waste gas. We see now there's a couple of operations in Africa that are actually starting to do that. Um, Cow dung in India, like it could power like something like crazy, like 50% of the Bitcoin network. So there's a lot of opportunities for using food waste, for agricultural waste, for landfill waste, and that's not even thinking about all the excess energies in the solar, in the renewable space. I just saw in the news and some of the comments on X over the past few days that the UK has been just like basically wasting away energy because they're producing too much renewables right now.
El Salvador volcano bonds. I mean, this is crazy.
Yeah,
It's like a
yeah, yeah,
sci-fi
yeah.
movie where mining Bitcoin from a volcano. But like you said, it's already there. So why not leveraging it?
Yeah, yeah. And right now, the state of battery technology is such that, like in places like California, where there's a lot of solar energy, the batteries, you can store the battery energy for relatively short amount of time. Like you can't go all night with it. But after the sun goes down, you probably have 3 or 4 hours when there's still fairly high demand that you can store in batteries, but it doesn't have that flexibility that Bitcoin mining does. And Bitcoin mining, if it's attached to renewable energy facilities, then that gives you it increases. This was one of the points in our landfill paper as well, that by monetizing something that isn't being already monetized, that gives the operators more cash, more equity, and more capacity to go out and finance larger operations. So it's this thing in the renewal, like having worked most of my career in the environmental field, it's just like when I hear people within the environmental field really criticize Bitcoin, usually without understanding, or sometimes it will be with understanding it and criticizing it anyway. It just makes me really wonder about what the incentives are there, and like why people are doing this, because the people that actually look at it closely, it's just like, this is just a no-brainer.
What's your view here? How long do you think we need before the average Joe is going to start doing the research, or at least, I'm not saying reading the Bitcoin Standard, that would be amazing, but maybe watching a couple of videos or typing into Google Bitcoin, because we've seen some trends in Google, but it's small numbers so far.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I mean, it's part of it. It's the thing that also Bitcoin fixes in some ways. It's the time preference. I mean, you just look. I have a daughter who's now 40 years old, and she has kids, and it's like her life is so busy. It's just so incredibly busy, and everything. It's sort of this. It's very typical of this short time preference, perspective that so many people have. I'm not saying anything against her or anything against, the younger generations that are under these pressures. I mean, there's financial pressures, and there's so much. It's like how this is an educational problem. How do you actually get educational content to people that are so busy that they don't have time to watch? And I mean, that's one thing that, watch the YouTube and podcast space in Bitcoin's just amazing, but there's a lot of content. And so how do you pick through that and sort through it and get people to get the time? And we didn't talk about this earlier off camera, but one of the things that I've been trying to do when I worked for government, I used to do policy notes. That was or policy briefs. That's one of the things that I did professionally. And so there's a very set standard. And I've been trying to do YouTube policy briefs, basically. So boil down. I've got the transcriptions from YouTube broadcasts, and then run it through. So I use Chat GBT 01 and 03, boil these things down. So the chat will go through. I have everything pretty well automated right now. And so I go through and try to do policy briefs, and basically, what are the take home messages? What's the link to the actual podcast if you find something interesting, so you can go and see the whole thing for yourself? Who might be interested in this? Sort of like a 3-paragraph overview. And what are some of the open questions and implications that are out there? So maybe at some time, like, that will take off. But we did talk a little bit about how Google doesn't really reward content that isn't trying to sell things right now. And I'm not really trying to sell anything on my site. So we'll see how that goes. But I think there's a lot of video shorts that might be useful. There's probably different people have different ideas about how some of that content can get out. But I think my view on it is that it's just time constraints, that something needs to give to allow people to have just that little bit of time extra that they can start to look into it.
I don't even think people know they have a problem. You know what I mean? Like they think
Yeah.
they think they have their money in the bank, which is not money, not in the bank, and it's not theirs.
Yeah.
But they don't know these three things. They think, oh, well, I don't need this. I already have my bank account. I already have my. I mean, if you live in certain part of the world, because of course Bitcoin fixes that too. If you are in Africa, for example, there is no banks
Yeah.
there. With a cell phone, you can be a bank. Most of the people, I would like to pick your brain here, because most of the people, I think, they going through these journeys because it's the people, they maybe have extra money and they want to invest. Whether I think it should be backward, I think it should be people who they have money to begin with.
Well, and even in North America, I'm not sure what the situation right now in Europe is, but in North America, I mean, we have supposedly somewhere in the range of 40% of households are going paycheck to paycheck right now, like with no savings at all. And who needs it most? And it's like, people that are unbanked internationally. And there's also a need for people in developed countries that are living paycheck to paycheck to somehow look to get ahead. And to be able to like, and I've had friends that have been sort of say financially strapped. So all their cash flow from salaries is coming in, and it's going out to mortgages and to kids' school and to everything else that is sort of that people have responsibilities for. And I think one friend in particular said, "Well, should I buy Bitcoin?" And she was looking, well, is it Bitcoin or should I, buy a house? And like how much she lives in Denmark, so it's like uh, places are pretty expensive there. And I said, no, no, you like, you shouldn't buy Bitcoin. You have to be capable of watching it go down 30 or 40 or 50% and not freak out about it. And so there's that part of it. Even people that have money, maybe it's more education that needs to be, to get, again, it's that time preferences or that long-term view. And I don't know how in our current society how we can do that. Now here in Canada we have, I don't know if you've had Seb Bunny on your program before. He talks a lot about time preferences. So he has a book on, which I can't remember the name of right now, but he's just across the water from me over on the mainland side. I'm in Vancouver Island. He's up in Squamish. So I went over to the first meetup that him and his friend had up in Squamish about a month or two ago. And he did this wonderful talk to the Bitcoin meetup people, everybody that just showed up. There's probably 50 people showed up that were interested in Bitcoin. And he did this wonderful talk about, how not being able to save money and being so financially strapped for anybody under 40 in Canada right now. You can't afford a house. It's causing all sorts of spin-off social impacts as well. And people delaying having families, and there's all this stuff that goes on for that generation. Like I think I sort of came away from that meetup even with more appreciation just for how stressful it really was for people like under 40 years old.
I truly believe that Bitcoin is actually the only thing you can own, truly, because everything else is just an illusion, right? And I work 12 months a year. I make money. So think about time as opposed to currency, because time is the most valuable currency we have. So how do I store my time? How do I preserve all my sweat equity that I put into my job? How do I make sure that my kids are going to benefit of my hard work, my labor? And I think I don't know. I mean, if you ask me, I would say Bitcoin is the best investment you can possibly do. No financial advice. That's what I'm doing, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
out there yet. And I think it's gonna take some time. Now you've seen, and I wanted to ask you this. Now you've seen ETFs. You've seen Michael Saylor with, now it's called strategy. So I wonder, how long do you think we need before the majority of the companies are going to maybe consider a 1%, 2% allocation in this asset? What do you think?
That I mean, I'm just guessing at that. I would think it'd be like maybe 5 years or so, like just off the top of my head. It will take some real. It'll probably take going through some of these companies going through one full cycle. I would guess if we still have cycles. It's so I have an 88-year-old uncle that has done fairly well over his life. He knows that I do Bitcoin stuff and I work in the Bitcoin space, and I'm 66, so like I'm not like I'm total boomer myself, but yeah. So he goes out for coffee with all his friends, and they're all wealthy, and they're all talking about Bitcoin now. And I think it was the last price run up that up to $100,000 that got their attention. But he was telling me how he's asking his friends like what they understand about Bitcoin, and they're like sort of a little bit aware, but like really don't understand what it is or why it's different than from the altcoins or why it's different from a central bank digital currency. I don't think like most of the people that have heard of it don't understand any of that. So yeah, maybe 5 years is optimistic because I sort of talked to myself on that. Maybe it's longer.
Maybe now with Trump and the new administration, things could speed up a little bit more.
Well, on the policy side, there will probably be like lots of stuff happening, but I'm wondering how much backlash there will be as well. It's like, oh, this is just something for for the sort of the right-leaning people in America, and then we have an election coming in Canada not too long. We'll probably go that direction as well, I think. We're seeing it in Europe. So
Like you're formulating here, I'm also thinking, Bitcoin doesn't need any politics or anything, but is going to impact it. Like if Donald Trump says, I'm going to do a strategic Bitcoin reserve, well, the price is going to pump. If Kamala would have won, I would argue we would have dumped. So in a
yeah.
short term, right? Of course, in the long term, Bitcoin doesn't need anything, doesn't need anyone. He's going to do his thing and whatever. But there are things and events that will speed up a potential price action. And even if
Mhm.
I don't like saying it, price action is what makes the asset interesting to people. They don't know about it, right? So
Well, yeah, it definitely gets their attention.
do you think, by the way, we topped up? Is it the end of the cycle? Do we still have
Oh, I
cycles?
I mean, my view on that is that, like, from some of the modeling that I've done, is that we have a long ways to go. Well, the modeling side was comes from Satoshi Action too, because we've been working a lot with the state governments, and so we've been looking in hindsight, sort of doing counterfactual studies of what would have happened if the state governments would have invested in Bitcoin. Back in 2018 up till the end of 2024, how much better off would they have been, which was quite a bit better off in most cases. And then we've also been looking forward price modeling as well. So there's a lot of uncertainties in it right now. But I'm probably one of the few people in the you know in the world, I imagine, that is maybe worried about the price going up too quickly, too high. I think that could actually be quite damaging. So seeing it kick around is fine.
For the first time ever in the Bitcoin history, we've seen going above the all-time high prior to the halving. That never happened. So technically, I mean, I know that people are saying this time is different. It's kind of a meme because it's always kind of the same rhymes kind of thing. But at the same time, for how long can we go in the same story over and over? It's becoming too predictable, I think. And now we have institutions playing the game and people with serious money,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah. And the one of the interesting things, like with the price decline over the past week or so, I hesitate. I don't even want to call it a crash, because it's not a crash when it goes down. Where are we, 21% down or something like that? There was some huge outflows just over the last couple of days from BlackRock and some of the other ETFs, and that says to me, it's like, okay, so what's going on? What are the strategies for the institutional investors? How are they hedging? Were they like long in the ETFs and short Bitcoin, which would probably, that could help explain part of like that price suppression on the chop for a while. There's a lot of things that go on once the institutions are into the game that might be factors that change the cycle substantially. So either advance it or push it back and have some different impacts on what the tops and bottoms are actually like. My own view, coming from in agricultural economics, in Canada, we have a lot of products that are controlled. So we only let so much supply out onto the market, and that keeps, of course, prices boosted up. Anybody that's seen the movie Blood Diamond, has also understands that the diamond industry really works with supply as well. My view, like, on Bitcoin, is that it's the only asset that we've ever seen in the history of the world that is a fixed supply, that actually is a fixed supply. It's only a matter of time till we run down and get to a point where there's a liquidity or a real supply shock. Unlike most people, though, I think my personal perspective right now, it's based on the modeling that we're doing, and so I'm always flexible. Like, if the models say something different, like, my opinion sort of shifts accordingly. But right now, I think we're probably at least 14 to 15 million Bitcoin in liquid supply. If you count all the long-term hodlers, we've seen over the past couple of months, we've seen all these coins come out of the long-term holders, and so this is people that, who knows, maybe they picked up their Bitcoin when it was like $1,000 or $10,000, and they've done a 10 or 100x on it, and they're cashing out some of it right now. My feeling right now is that there's probably more liquid supply than most people think, and that it will take a while to work through that. And if we have states, and if we have a national reserve that actually is a national reserve, not really a stockpile that will come back into the market, 5 years down the line, my feeling is that we're going to see prices go like substantially higher, but it might not be as quickly as a lot of people tend to think right now.
I agree. I'm going to say something extremely controversial here, but I love the fact that we corrected 20% or whatever it was, 22 or 21 in that region, because that means A, this thing is volatile, which volatility is actually a good thing, I
That's
believe.
good. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Me too.
This thing has to move in between hands. People have to make their own whatever ideas, profits, as long as it's healthy. Like as long as people are not going to do any shady stuff, right? I'm
Yeah.
actually very happy that this is happening and it's a healthy correction. There was no, I mean, I'm not a TA expert and I wanted to ask you because I know you look into many models, but you can see, I mean, whenever there is a chart, like you can project into the charts human behaviors because that's, I think, it's what's happening, right? People look into charts, they see things, they behave accordingly, so they kind of create their own reality, maybe to a degree. And
Yeah.
do you have a model specifically that you like, or do you have a system to predict Bitcoin price? Is it possible to predict Bitcoin movements?
I mean, I have the long term, like a supply shock model that I'm working on, and we published one paper on that like a couple of months ago. Uh, and it was showing potential hyperbolic price increase. But and what I'm working on right now, like literally, like this week, I'm trying to get this model so I reincorporate, when people buy Bitcoin, I'm just imagining that like there's a certain different types of holders have different sort of price targets. So I'm trying to set up in the model functionally an order book and a market maker function that feeds the coin back into the liquid supply. And I think once I have that finished, probably some of the earlier like price predictions that might have been somewhere up in what we would see in a power law model, they might be a little bit optimistic once coin starts to come back into market. But again, that's only a temporary thing. So the other thing I see there is that there are going to be the real hardcore hodlers. So think of it like in this, as Bitcoin circulates, it's in the hands of traders and speculators. It goes out, it's out of market for maybe like a year or so, and then somebody sells it back into the market again. And each time it gets resold, the odds are I think we'll get higher and higher that it goes to real long-term permanent reserves or to hodlers that are able to take loans out against their Bitcoin. So it's like every circulation, it's almost like a tax, if you're getting taxed, on this income going in and out, if you're a trader and every time you did a trade, you were getting taxed a few percent and your pool of money just keeps getting smaller. I think that's what we're going to see with Bitcoin over the longer term is that we'll see increasing amounts over time where the coins really become inaccessible, that Bitcoin is put away into permanent reserve. And I mean, I'm sure lots of people like this, and I've met people that were into the space really early, and they have a split in their holdings, and they have like part of that is they're never going to touch, and then maybe they'll have price targets on the other portions of their portfolio, and maybe start to pull out some coins and sort of layer out as the price goes up. But I think the coins that will be available for that over the long term are going to decrease in number. So I think a massive supply shock is absolutely inevitable, but I don't know when it's going to happen.
Hopefully, at some point, there's going to be the option to leverage against your Bitcoins, right? Because now the only way for you to quote profit is to sell your investment. But
Yeah.
if you look into anything else, and this is like a baby, it's a $2 trillion asset. I mean, it's nothing compared to everything else. How long do you think we need before we see companies coming up with legit solutions for users to say, hey, I don't want to sell my Bitcoin. Can I just borrow against it?
I'm not sure about that. Like, I don't really follow that part of the market like very much, but my impression is there's a couple of smaller companies that are experimenting with that right now. I know of other people that have been looking to set up like Bitcoin banks in different jurisdictions. That's what their intent is. But things have been slowly moving along, so I'm not sure. I would think that somebody is going to be able to come up with a solution that sort of fits, like that can be scaled up, that doesn't require people to give up custody of their Bitcoin. And when that happens, I think you're going to have a lot of Bitcoiners that would have been maybe having a sell target of like $500,000 or so. That those Bitcoin that might have been sold at one time, they're just never going to come back into the market again. And again, supply shock. As we get closer and closer, right now, my models are saying that we need to get down to roughly a 2 million liquid supply uh, before we really start to see the effects of a supply shock. That's still quite a ways away, I think. But everything, if people start to understand that, oh no, we can take loans out against Bitcoin, then that will accelerate the process. And then, of course, you have the states and the nation states that are looking at reserves, and those coins, once those Bitcoin leave the liquid market, like, you're never going to see those again. MicroStrategy, same thing. Odds of sailors Bitcoin coming back to market, I would think, would be, yeah, really low.
Now, if you look into the data and to the numbers, you say, okay, well, Bitcoin does what, 50% average on its own a year. So if I want to borrow against it and I lose my custody to get an extra 10%, I'm not risking
Yeah,
that. I mean, why
no,
would I do
no,
it?
no.
It's no
Yeah,
point.
it makes no sense, no sense whatsoever. I think the other really interesting thing, and you've probably interviewed people on your podcast before about this, is what strategy is doing right now with these loans, because you're actually that's creating new money in the system. When they're bonds, and anybody that at a national level that does Bitcoin bonds, that's uh, that's an expansion of the credit base. So, when we look at Bitcoin, we can also look in on chain, and we can see, well, these long term holders, and the Bitcoin isn't doing anything. Once we get into a state where we can actually have secure lending, then all of a sudden, all those coins, they're part of the credit base. Those stored Bitcoin, or the value of that stored Bitcoin, has the capacity to bring real money into the real world to be used on other things, and like strategies doing, using that money to buy more Bitcoin. But for individuals, maybe that will be looking to get a house, or some sort of other investment, or invest in your children's education, whatever the case is. But that was money coming into the system that wasn't there before. So from a supply demand perspective, we have this supply that's creeping lower and lower and lower and lower, and we're going to hit a supply shock sometime. But then on the other side, we have, governments, the money printing or the credit expansion by changing your banking rules. Now we have private companies that are starting to issue bonds that are actually, like, given the size of strategy just doesn't make sense. But
I know about
strategy,
that.
strategy, or MicroStrategy's strategy, that has the potential to bring a lot more money into the market. And we start to see that being replicated in Japan and in China and different parts of the world. There's also, I think, and I don't have any numbers on this, but I think there's also, besides the people that are tucking away Bitcoin into reserves, I think there's also some potential for a demand side shock to the upside that people might not be aware of right now, or that many people might not be aware of.
I know a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people, for example, even in my network, they don't even want to have custody. And they are Bitcoiners. They're like, hey, you know what? I just want someone else to have a responsibility, which, as long as you understand the risk you're taking, hey, you do you, I
Yeah.
don't judge. I want to be my own bank, I have my own process, but I respect everyone. So
Yeah.
I think having strategy now coming in, Jesus, Michael Saylor's
Yeah.
company.
Yeah.
It's such a tricky one to talk about, but whatever.
Yeah.
Which is risky because we don't know what happens when he goes away, what happens if someone decides at some point to change the strategy.
The talk on X over the past few days about what happens if, he gets nationalized, more or less.
And this is why Bitcoin in self custody is king, because nobody can touch it, nobody can change it. Whether if you rely on a third party, on a custodian, well, I think that's my opinion. Sooner or later, you will get slapped by something or someone you have not thought about it in the strategy, because it's not you holding it, it's someone else. And when it's someone
Yeah.
else, it's never on you. What are you
Mm-hmm.
expecting for 2025? Are you expecting us to move up higher again? Are you expecting us to go sideways through summer? Do you have any ideas? I know it's $1 million questions, but what's your 2025 two satoshis?
Yeah. Well, I'll say, like, I used to trade options younger. I've never been a professional trader, but, like, I know enough that um I could trade, like, chart patterns, like, and when it was based on human psychology, but I don't think you can do that anymore. So the very first time I bought Bitcoin, it did one of its breakouts, and it went shooting up, and I thought, okay, well, I'll sell it. Like, I just, like, made like 6% in a day, and I was all happy about that. No, and then I did it like again, and then it got smacked back down. You know how they go out, sometimes the market makers will go up and like grab all the liquidity and then go completely the other direction. Now with like if we look at short term in like 1 year predictions, I don't know. I mean, I personally I expect it to go up, but like nothing on Bitcoin surprises me, I don't think anymore. And I haven't been in it like as long as you have, but I just think that there's so much going on. There's bot trading, and there's ETFs, and there's all these different types of strategies that can be implemented with your ETFs and your derivatives now. And so it's not clear to me at all, not being a professional, like working in the space full time, what exactly is going on in the market. If you have a bunch of people in retail, or maybe that are not professional and in the market full time, that you can probably count that things are going to go the other way.
I completely agree. That's why I hammer it on my podcast and I say all the time, buy Bitcoin on a monthly base or a weekly base with money you don't need in the short term, and do the math every 10, 15 years. That's it. Because if you
Mhm.
don't do this, it's literally impossible to
Yeah,
predict what's going to happen. There is all
yeah.
sorts. I don't even know why people, I mean, I guess I know because of clicks and attentions, but why there is this, and maybe ego, but why there is thing about, I'm telling you where Bitcoin is. Dude, nobody knows nobody
Nobody
knows
knows.
anything. Nobody knows anything.
No.
We are just here trying to speculate. And even what I just said, in 10, 15 years, maybe it won't even be the case, because maybe Bitcoin is deciding to do his own thing. And I don't know.
There's a risk, but like personally, I'm much more confident in the longer term that it's going to like really substantially accelerate. But the timing, I would be. I mean, you look at the value right now, like the market value of Bitcoin, and well, it was up to 2 trillion. We're a bit underneath that now. Gold is at 16, or was at 16 last year. I think it's maybe 18 right now. So 9x up to gold's level. I totally think Bitcoin can catch gold. And then you start to do the math, and this is what Saylor and this is what some of the other people do, like in the Bitcoin space, looking at, well, what are your expected shares for market cap out of the bond market, out of the real estate market, and you start looking at if Bitcoin starts to monetize the real estate market, then things could get really crazy. And you're thinking, well, is it reasonable to think that that's going to happen over time, over the next decade? And I don't know. Like I've just found the more time I spend looking at Bitcoin and trying to understand what it does, I don't view that as like as a surprise, or I don't view it as something that seems really, really implausible. And you must see this all the time too with the people that you talk to. You talk to people that are within the space that like really, really are focused on it, like working full time in it. Nobody that I know has any qualms about talking about $1 to $3 million Bitcoin. All have qualms about when, but like the idea of $1 million Bitcoin is just like it's just like a given right now. It seems.
On the table, I have gold, I have real estate, I have stock, the S&P, other assets, I maybe watches, whatever, art. There is a bunch, right? And you think about
Mm-hmm.
which one has the most potential ever in terms of return. I mean, Bitcoin is a
Oh,
baby, 10% of gold. Even if we get to when we get to half of gold, it's like $500,000 per coin. And it's not that
yeah,
crazy to think that we will get there eventually. Now, the $1 million question is when, but who cares?
yeah.
Like, even if it takes 5 years or 10 years, still it will be the best investment ever. And in fact, if you go back into history, this is what's happening. If you would have hold Bitcoin as opposed to anything else, you'll be happy.
One of the other things I think too that like why it's really hard to say what will happen is we look at the Bitcoin network, and it's not really that active right now, and that doesn't bother me at all. It's because anybody that does network theory and looks at Metcalfe's law and power laws are talking about the adoption. And you know, the other thing that I see is that, well, Bitcoin that isn't moved for 10 years is being used by somebody. That doesn't mean necessarily that it's lost. It just means that people are hanging on to it, and it's a store of value for them. And so I don't know how the reason I went to a supply and demand framework for trying to model Bitcoin's price over the longer term is exactly because we don't know. The only thing we know is where the supply is. We know that for sure. Well, given some allowance for lost coins, but I mean, we have a really good idea where supply is. Demand can keep going up like indefinitely, and that just, you know, decreasing supply, increasing demand, it says higher prices. There's just no other way around it, but it's how much and when.
Yeah, absolutely. Super well said. And as always, I will link in the description your own personal X account and all the bunch of articles you've written, which I love. I read all of them. So for those of whom you guys watching,
Thanks.
wanting to know where to find Murray, use the description. You will find everything down there. But thank you so much, man. It's been great having you on the show. You definitely have to come back. I really enjoyed our chat.
Oh yeah, that would be awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
It's been a pleasure. And guys, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you on the next one.